Good morning, everybody, and welcome to A Taste of Torah, the 5781 edition. We are beginning again at the beginning. Now, it's not the beginning again for Taste of Torah because I started this mid-cycle last year. But here we are in the first portion of the first book of the Torah, Bereshit, or Genesis, and this is all the incredibly juicy and fantastic stuff that begins our Torah. Now, you'll notice I started with a trailer for this, the very famous 1920 silent edition of The Golem, which is going to be one of the films we're going to be watching on Thursday nights at Thursday at the Theater. Oi! The horror! We're going to be looking at Jewish horror films from the very beginning of cinema to today. And one of the centerpiece materials is the Golem, who has been used as a protagonist or central character in several Jewish films. So, why am I showing this to you at the very beginning of the very beginning? Well, I'm doing it because, of course, the story itself really is an homage to Genesis. Because what happens in Genesis, God breathes life into a pile of clay and sets it loose in the world. And strangely enough, God does not fully anticipate all of the things that this new creation can do. And it turns out that while this creation was made for God's specific purpose, though that's not completely clear in the book of Genesis, this creation goes off in its own direction. And likewise, the same story is told in the Golem. And only it's told from the perspective of humanity using its godlike powers, which is also an idea from the book of Genesis from our Torah portion. So that's what we're going to be talking about here. But in a moment, I want to call attention to a couple of things. First of all, in case you weren't aware, we live in Texas. And in Texas, which is definitely its own country, we encounter a dominant form of Christianity, a subset of Protestantism, called evangelicalism, and its shared companion fundamentalism. And both of these movements tend to emphasize the idea of literalism, that one should look at the stories in the Bible as literally or really factually true. So you're going to encounter, if you haven't already, plenty of fellow Texans who believe that the world was created in 6 days, that the world is 6,000 years old, that human beings were created by clay on the 6th day, and Adam and Eve or the first couple, and are physical ancestors. it probably is needless to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Jews, as with very few exceptions, don't accept that as true. What I would say about the stories of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, and really the first 11 chapters of Genesis, is that that is the Jewish people's mythic history. Now, myth is a loaded term. I may have said this before. I'm going to say it again because I can't emphasize it enough because you live in Texas. And that is that in popular parlance, we use the word myth to mean something that's not true, something that never happened. And what I want to emphasize to you is that the true function in human civilization of myths is to teach us about something that always happens, something that is universally true. The purpose of a good myth is to give us insight into ourselves. And I think actually the Genesis myth does an excellent job of doing that, because even if the facts aren't correct, it is speaking some profound truths about the nature of humanity, the nature of our world, our relationship to God. And so that's worth considering. Now, how do I know? And how can you know? And how can you explain to your neighbors why this is not a scientific treatise? Why these events did not really happen as described in the first chapters of the book of Genesis? Pardon me, I'm about to sneeze. There we go, I feel better. All right. So I'll just focus on one thing. There are many things we could talk about. If you've been educated in, for example, the age of the earth, or taken geology, or taken biology, or any number of courses in university, you have plenty of reasons to say why this is a myth, but I'm going to focus on one. And that's the name Adam, or in Hebrew, Adam. Now, when you talk to your literalist neighbors, they're going to tell you that the name of the first human being who ever existed was Adam, and the name of the first woman who ever existed was Eve. All right? And so these are their proper names, and we should understand that. But that is not at all what the author of Genesis, whoever he is, Moses or whoever, is trying to communicate to us, because that's not the first human being's name. The first human being doesn't have a name. All right? So in Hebrew, Adam is drawn from the word Adamah. The joke, the pun, is right there in Genesis. So Adamah is earth, Adam is man. And so is it the equivalent in English of the first man's name is Clay? Get it? Clay, right? No. In fact, we know that because the author of the story doesn't call Adam Adam, he calls him Ha-Adam. In other words, the Adam. Or, if I were to translate that correctly, the earthling, the clay. All right? So right away, the Genesis is communicating to us this is not a literal person. This is a type or an idea of who we are. We are, as the Bible says in other places, and Judaism has repeated many, many times, nothing but dust and ashes. All right? We are clay. And so Adam means the earthling. And Eve, Chava, means the living thing. So these are metaphors. And the author knows that they're metaphors. So we can know that we're not talking about literal historical events or factual historical events. All right, got that out of the way. So the Bible itself tells us what we should think about these stories. But let's go back to the golem, and let's go back to Ha'adam and the creation of the clay guy. All right. So, what is important, what the author wants to communicate to us, is that each of us, every human being, is first of all a mix of base earth and divinity. And we see that in the initial story of our creation. Now, there are two creation stories, right? The first one runs from about Genesis 126 to 2:3, chapter 2, verse 3. And in it, we are told in very schematic terms that God creates humanity, that God creates humanity as a binary pair, man and woman. And it says some very nice things about the human being, that the human being is made in the image of God. Then there's a second creation story, which is the one we're thinking of right now, which starts in chapter 2, verse 4, where God literally sits down and, like the character in the golem, molds clay into a humanoid shape, thus taking the base materials of the creation and making us mere clay, but then doing something even more extraordinary. God breathes, like a resuscitation. God breathes his breath, or a equally proper translation, his spirit, into the clay, and humanity comes alive. So the first message, which is not spelled out but is implicit in the story, is that we are a combination of clay and ashes and divine spirit. All right? So we are this wonderful alloy of things that are earthly and heavenly. And that, I think, is a very important message, that we're not like a rock. We're not like a pile of clay. Well, we are like a pile of clay, but we're much more than that. We're, as capitalists would say, we're value added. All right? So, that's the first message that appears in our Torah, and I think it's an important one, but they're even more important, and maybe one of the greatest Jewish ideas ever. Remember, during the High Holidays, I preached about great Jewish ideas, and I talked about joy as a religious value. I talked about tikkun olam, and what was the third thing I talked about? I can't remember right now. I'm sorry, I'm getting old. But in any case, so I talked about three of the great Jewish ideas that Rabbi Green emphasizes in his books, The 10 Greatest Jewish Ideas. But another one that he brings up, which I didn't bring up in the High Holidays, is the idea that we are made in the image of God. And that is explicitly stated in our story. All right? In Genesis, we are told he made them in the image of God. In the image of God, he made them. Now, that is an amazing idea. First of all, because it places everyone on an equal status. It's not that aristocrats come from one origin and serfs come from another origin, that there are extraordinary superheroes in our world and there are just stam, as we would say in Hebrew, ordinary people. No, each and every one of us, whatever social position or economic position we occupy now in the world, are fundamentally equal in the eyes of God. That's an incredibly important message, especially it came at a time in the Iron Age when societies were naturally stratified, when there were aristocrats and there were warriors and classes of people, not unlike the caste system that is preserved in India, the idea that some people are by nature and by lineage untouchable. Others of them are merchants and farmers. Then there is a separate caste for warriors, and then there is a separate caste for priests. All right. Now, that idea of a separate caste does creep up later in biblical tradition, but we're not going to talk about that right now. What we're going to talk about is the fundamental message that there are no innate castes to being human, that we all stand equal in the eyes of God. But as important as that is this very peculiar declaration that we are made in the image of God. Now, that's a statement that begs the question, what does it mean to be in the image of God? All right, are we talking about the physical image of God? And I'll be honest with you, there have been Jewish thinkers in the past who have used that possibility, right? The idea that we are physically in the form of God. You can, in fact, read in Jewish mysticism a book called Shir Koma, which literally means the measurement of the height of the divine being. All right, and it rather fabulously describes the cosmic size of God, the size of God's hands, the size of God's eye, the length of God's beard, because of course they would interpret God as being male. At the same time, it's pretty clear once you've read through it that these scales are ridiculous and completely disproportional from one part of the body to another. And really, it seems to be an exercise in reductio ad absurdum, that it takes the literalism of the image of God so literally that in the end you realize it's a useless exercise. All right, so it starts us with literalism and brings us to metaphor. So the image of God has been used in physical sense, and certainly the Bible does, right? Because it is God who brings us out, wrong hand, with a strong right hand and an outstretched arm, and brings us from Egyptian slavery. So God sees in the Bible, God hears, God has fingers and arms, and God walks, and anthropomorphisms abound throughout the Bible. Now, hard to say what they're really saying. Are they really saying that God is just like a supersized human being? It's like the big gulp of humanism, right? I really don't think so. And Maimonides in the Middle Ages basically points out all the places in the Torah that it contradicts itself, that in fact it says that God is not at all like a human being, and then points out how words like hand and arm and eye and ear of God appear metaphorically. All right? And that we use all these physical terms as ways of expressing things that can't otherwise be expressed. Famously, the Talmud says that the Bible speaks in the language of men, meaning that we shouldn't take it literally. The authors are just trying to describe to us something that's undescribable. Okay, let's leave that aside for the moment. Now, so that brings us to other possibilities. What does it mean to be in the image of God? And actually, the Golem story helps highlight some of those ideas, because we paralleling God, create a living being in this story. We create him out of clay. We perform the act of what is said in Latin of imitatio Dei. We imitate what God does. All right? And that's part of the profound delight of the golem story, because we now live in an age where we pretty much can do godlike things, right? We can repair bodies. We can. I'm back. I'm sorry. Calls from the missus always take priority. I'm sorry. But it doesn't mean I don't love you. It's just that I love her more. So, anyway, what was I saying? Oh, the golem actually tells us some things about what Jews have believed about what it means to be in the image of God. First of all, the image of God may be representing the idea that we, like God, have free choice. What's important to the golem story? The golem is created by Rabbi Loew of Prague with the idea that he's going to be an automaton, that he's going to do whatever Rabbi Loew tells him to do. And the purpose is to protect the Jews of Prague. And the golem does that. The golem saves the Jews of Prague from a pogrom, and so he fulfills that part of his mission. However, in the interim, unbeknownst to Rabbi Loew, the golem develops its own will. It starts to think for itself, and as a result, things go awry. And depending on the story you read, the golem either goes astray or goes amok. And so right there, embedded in that, is one of the fundamental ideas that Jews have had about what it means to be in the image of God, that we have free will. Now, of course, Adam and Eve go amok in their own way, but one has a sense that maybe God intended that from the beginning. Unlike Rabbi Loew of Prague, he anticipates what free will demand. So the ability to make moral decisions, to have freedom of conscience, that's one of the things that's in the image of God. We are not bound, like many other animals, to pure instinct. Now, another feature of the golem story is that the golem can't talk, which is meant to suggest the limitations of the human ability to imitate God. We can't make a full human being the way God can make a full human being out of clay. So the golem is unable to speak. And so that becomes one of the fundamental ideas about what it means to be in the image of God, which is that human beings seem to have this complex system of communication that isn't easily detectable in the rest of the animal world, which is the ability to speak. And by extension of that, it is the ability to remember and to preserve memory, which of course is such a central idea to Judaism. So our capacity not only to communicate, but to pass on our communications, not from contemporary to contemporary, but to following generations. That may be the image of God. And so, never underestimate the importance and symbolism of speech or writing in Jewish tradition. These are divine forces. What we say and what we write matter because these are divine tools. So that's another way that Jewish tradition has interpreted B'Tselem Elohim, the image of God. But I think the ultimate way that is being expressed in the story of the golem is, of course, the essential moment, which is that human beings create another being, right? And so maybe what it is that makes us in the image of God is our creative capacity. Now, other creatures in the animal kingdoms, and we are animals, can create things. Termites build houses. Otters use tools. Um, Animals communicate in very complex ways. So oftentimes it's a matter of degree rather than a qualitative difference. It's a quantitative difference. However, our ancestors, who were not biologists and didn't know everything we know about the animal kingdom, saw the unique ability of our creativity that really seemed to be unparalleled in the ancient world. Um, a beaver can build a dam, but a beaver cannot resculpt the entire surface of the earth to its own purposes. But we can. And especially in the last 300-400 years, we have discovered our godlike capacities to create life and to destroy it. We've harnessed the atom. We have decoded DNA. And we are now demonstrating the most godlike capacities imaginable. And the story of the golem anticipates that, but so does the book of Genesis. So we have the capacity to imitate God at the highest level in a way that no other creature in the animal kingdom can do that. And that is both our glory and should be the source of our humility, which is the whole point of the golem story, is that we should be humble about our extraordinary powers. So we learn that we can imitate God in our actions, and what Bereshit invites us to do is to imitate God in wisdom also, to realize that just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do something, that there are limitations, that when we put some divine forces into motion, they're going to create a new reality that we may not have anticipated. And so the story of Bereshit is in many ways the story of us. And the myth is the myth of our eternal capacity to do good and do harm on a godly level. So that's my lesson from Bereshit. I'm going to stop here. It's such a rich passage that we could go on forever and ever about this. And I guess I do have to add something because it's the modern age, and that is when I use the term man generically, or the Hebrew equivalent, Adam, I mean humanity. And that means men and women. And of course, in the first creation story, just as an addendum, even though it's not an addendum, I want to remind everyone that what we're talking about is the divine capacity in both men and women, that they are created equally, however you want to interpret the second creation story. So, with those thoughts, I'm going to stop, and I look forward to talking with you again next week. So, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, and have a wonderful new year.